We've all had those frustrating times where our saw just won't cut the way it's supposed to, whether we have to push too hard or it starts smoking or it leaves burn marks. But today, we're going to talk about how to avoid all that. Before we get started, if you want to know the only 5 tools you need to start building impressive projects, there's a link to a free download below. I've also got a whole bunch of free plans on my website. A link to all those is also down below. But what we're going to talk about today applies to most saw blades. Now, of course, there's differences between blades on different tools, so we're also going to talk about that. Blades have teeth, and they're usually labeled in reference to those teeth. Circular blades for table saws, miter saws, and circular saws are described by how many total teeth they have. Jigsaw and bandsaw blades are usually described by how many teeth there are in an inch, TPI, or teeth per inch. Blade teeth are pointed in the direction of travel the vast majority of the time. This is pretty intuitive in tools that move in one motion. The teeth need to be able to cut in the direction of that motion. But in tools that move back and forth like a jigsaw or a handsaw, there's another factor. If a jigsaw blade's teeth face up, that means it will cut when the jigsaw blade is moving up, but the back of the blade's teeth will ride against the workpiece when the blade moves down and not make a cut. The direction the teeth are facing also affects whether a handsaw cuts on the push or pull stroke. There are blades like this flush trim saw with teeth that are pointed perpendicular to the saw or straight out to the side, and these blades cut on both motions. We need to know how a blade is cutting so that we use the tool correctly. If you aren't using a brand new blade, there's some things you need to make sure of before you stick a used blade on your saw. First, check that the teeth are clean and aren't covered in gunk like this blade. Wood contains sap, and some species also contain pitch. So as a saw blade moves through wood, it heats up and collects pitch and or sap on the teeth. The end result is a buildup that can really inhibit the performance of a blade. To clean it off, use Simple Green, or you could even use oven cleaner and then a toothbrush. Make sure you clean each tooth thoroughly. You'll also want to know how long a blade has been used, what the teeth are made of, and what types of wood they cut. Most consumer blades you buy from the home center will lose their sharpness pretty quickly. If you cut harder woods, that time is reduced even more. If a blade's cutting slower, leaving burn marks, or creating an ugly cut with a lot of tear out, it's probably time to replace it or get it sharpened. It's not enough just to buy the first blade you see, stick it on your saw, and then expect great results. Blades are made for different applications. The first consideration is to use the blade that's right for the material. There are blades for wood, metal, PVC, laminate, and others. No matter what tool you're using, you have to match the blade to the material type. Now, we're just talking about cutting wood in this video, so we'll stick to that. So now let's talk about the different parts of the blade. Now, these are for the table saw, the circular saw, and the miter saw. So these are the teeth, as I pointed out before, and this space that dips down in between the teeth is called the gullet. The gullet's the area that moves sawdust out of the cut as the blade spins. Teeth with a hump on the back called a chip limiter help prevent kickback. Blades also have expansion slots that allow for the blade to heat up and expand without warping the blade plate. And then there's anti-vibration slots like these that look like squiggly lines, and these cut down not only on vibration but also noise and heat. Blades for your table and miter saws can come in mainly 2 different thicknesses. They're referred to as thin kerf and full kerf. A kerf is just the slot that a saw blade cuts out of wood, so it's the width of the cutters on the blade. Full kerf blades are an 1/8 inch thick, and thin kerf are just a 32nd thinner at 3/32 of an inch. Now, that doesn't sound like much of a difference, but underpowered saws may have trouble pushing the extra width through a cut, and you'll need to use a thin kerf. Full kerf will also cause a little more heat buildup, especially if the saw is having trouble pushing it through the cut. The drawback to thin kerf, and it can be a major drawback, is that they're more prone to deflection, bending during the cut and not cutting exactly straight and square. For the circular saw, you really don't need to worry about the thickness of a blade. They all come with thin kerf, and it's nearly impossible to find anything else. Round saw blades also come with 2 main types of saw blade teeth. ATB, or alternate top bevel, are teeth that alternate their tooth angle from right to left with each tooth. FTG, or flat top grind, are exactly what their name implies. They are ground to have a flat top. You'll usually find ATB on high-tooth cross-cut blades because they leave a cleaner edge, but they also produce more heat, so rip blades usually have FTG teeth. A side note to this, if you're cutting a dado or a rabbit and you want a flat surface, you should use an FTG blade since it has a flat tooth. ATB can still do the job, but it'll leave ridges in the bottom from those alternating angles. So I use the rip blade with all my table saw jigs and to cut dados and rabbits. And a third type that you should desperately want to stay away from with all of your being is the steel blade. This is the one that originally came with my circular saw, and it's complete junk. This is stamped steel, and then the points are bent out to act as teeth. You'll be amazed at the difference between a blade like this and the one that I actually use in my circular saw that has carbide teeth. When it comes to woodworking, there are two main types of cuts: a cross cut or transverse cut, which cuts across the grain, and then a rip cut, which cuts along the grain. A cross cut is harder to make because you're severing the wood fibers and cutting through the lignin that holds those fibers together. It's especially tough to make a clean cross cut, so higher tooth count blades, either higher overall teeth or higher TPI, work better with a cross cut. Cross-cutting materials like plywood and to a greater degree laminate requires an even higher tooth count than solid wood. These materials have thin layers so they tear and chip easily. A 40-tooth blade and above for plywood and 80-tooth for laminate is generally going to get you the best results. The miter saw is all cross-cutting, so you'll want to keep a 40-tooth or higher blade on it. I keep a 60-tooth on mine. A rip cut is easier since you're separating the fibers and not completely cutting through them. Although depending on the piece of wood you're working with, you'll likely be cutting through some of the fibers. Because a rip cut is easier, it happens quicker. To prevent heat buildup, the blade needs to have a lower tooth count or a lower TPI with deeper gullets in between the teeth to really remove the sawdust out of the kerf. I use a 24-tooth blade on the table saw for rip cuts. I cut mostly plywood with my circular saw, and I want a clean cut, so I leave a 60-tooth blade on it. If you're doing some rougher work, cutting studs, or even using it to make long rips in solid wood, you might consider going down to a 40 or even a 20-tooth. Jigsaw and bandsaw blades have some extra considerations. Since these tools are able to cut curves, you've got to take into account the blade width. A wider blade will have a harder time cutting a curve than a more narrow blade. A good example is this scroll blade for the jigsaw. Notice how it's much more narrow than the other blades. I've got bandsaw blades that are meant for very rough milling, and they're massively wide to help with stability and strength, and they have fewer teeth with deep gullets for removing sawdust. This type of blade will leave a rough surface behind, but that's okay since it's meant for rough milling. On the other hand, there's bandsaw blades like this that are much more narrow with higher TPI. These are more multi-purpose blades that are better at curves and leave a nicer cut behind. Jigsaw blades follow the same characteristics, just on a smaller scale. So there's wider blades with a low TPI for cutting quicker, and then blades more for finishing that have a higher TPI. They're even labeled according to the application a lot of times, like this speed wood blade that's meant to cut faster but leaves a rougher cut than, say, this one. So let me bring all this together and give you some practical recommendations. If you're a beginner, get a 60-tooth cross-cut blade for your miter saw and then a 40-tooth combination blade for your circular saw. This will allow you to make really nice cross-cuts, and then you can break down plywood with your circular saw and get a nice clean cut. And then if you wanted to be able to rip solid wood with your circular saw, which I don't think you'll be doing a lot of, you could get a 20 or 24-tooth blade to do that. But wait till you actually need to do that before you buy that blade, just so you don't waste your money. Once you start learning more and get more experience and building more and eventually get a table saw, add a 24-tooth rip blade and a 40-tooth combination blade, and then you can venture out into dado blades. If you have a portable table saw, buy thin kerf blades. It'll come with a thin kerf, and I would recommend replacing it with thin kerf. If you have a cabinet saw or a hybrid table saw, use full kerf because they're more accurate and consistent. And if you start having trouble, maybe your motor's a little underpowered or it's old and worn out, you can always move down to a thin kerf. I don't recommend buying miter saw and table saw blades from the home center. It won't save you any money in the long run to buy cheap blades. If you get a good blade, it'll not only last longer, but it can also be sent off and sharpened for about 15 bucks instead of buying a new blade. I use these Freud Industrial and Freud Premier Fusion blades. They're not the top of the line, but they're a lot better than what you find at the home center, and they've got nice thick carbide teeth that can be resharpened. I feel the same about bandsaw blades. They should be a thoughtful purchase as well. I've had bad welds on bandsaw blades, and it just makes a blade that was still sharp completely worthless. I do buy jigsaw blades from the home center, and I buy them in these multi-packs. You don't have to order them anywhere special to get decent ones. Now you know how to choose a blade that's in good condition, and that's the right blade for the jobs. If you got any more questions about saw blades, ask those down in the comments. If you're curious about what tools you need to get started in woodworking, and I'll give you a hint, it's not near as many as you think it is, then I've got a free download for you. The link to that is down below or right here on the screen. Now it's time to head over and watch one of these two videos, and I'll see you over there.